Hello.
Hi.
Welcome to the 12th house.
I'm Michelle.
And I'm Wallace.
We're so happy that you're here.
We are also excited to intro a new little series that we're doing over the next 6 episodes.
Yeah, we wanted to talk about inspired creation because for so many of you, our dear listeners, and the people in our community, we are, above all things, creators and intuitive creators at that. And there are so many bright sides to being a creative genius like you are, but there's also a lot of shadow there, especially like in, I think, a time of social media where it's really easy to get burnt out. Mm-hmm. And also just being cognizant of how many people are going back to maybe their day job or going back to the workforce and maybe trying to maintain that thing that they started during the pandemic, that maybe potential business or idea or project. And how do you balance those two things and keep that sort of channel of intuition? And if you're a creative person, what you're doing is pulling information from another realm and sort of bringing it forth into the world. You are a channel. How do you keep that clear and bright and energized without, like, I guess, burning it out? Like, you know, when you plug a, I don't know, curling iron into a European socket, you know, just like getting too much, zapping it forever.
Yeah, and the pandemic has been great in so many ways, and not to say it's over, but as things shift back into not what they were before, because they can't, but new normals of living in the pandemic, I think a lot of us have experienced space and growth in certain areas and certain pillars, but then others maybe have had a lot of pressure put on them. So we have these pillars that are maybe a little bit burnt out and these pillars that have been refreshed. And so it's like, how do we bring some of them into balance, especially being a creator when, a lot of that is dependent and a lot of that is self-regulatory stuff, you know, whether you're an artist or an entrepreneur, you don't have somebody always holding your hand and holding you accountable ever.
Yeah.
And so finding ways to make the creation process rejuvenating and regenerative is part of the whole act.
It's why you do it. Yeah. It should be life-giving. It shouldn't feel like it's sucking things away from you. Like, being a creator means to be like doing your sacred work. So how do you do that without like sacrificing yourself and your well-being and sort of losing the forest for the trees, which I think happens a lot when we get into the like sort of content creation cycle or even creative cycle, right? And then when we try to bridge that gap from making something out of the pureness of like our soul because it needs to be made and also then getting paid for it, which we're going to talk about the witch wound over the next couple of weeks too, as we talk about inspired creation, but that is like directly connected to the witch wound. So over the next couple of weeks, we'll talk about how this all comes into play from an intuitive perspective, from an actual logistical perspective, from a squiggly brain perspective, and from an archetype perspective, and talk to you a little bit more about which creative archetype you might be or you might be embodying right now, and maybe the light elements and the shadowy elements that you should be aware of so that you can keep yourself on track and do what you're here to do. But today we have an amazing guest to just, hit the ground running, talking about how to recover from burnout as a creative person. Anita Stubenrauch is she's everything.
A vision.
She is the moment. Truly. She kept saying things where I was like double taking. Like, what? You did that? You did that? Like, how cool. And I don't know. What a great conversation. I feel like we could have talked forever.
Anita spent over 13 years working at Apple in a creative writing capacity. She wrote the credo for Apple. She authored many presentations that were given to top executives like Steve Jobs and Angela Arendt. She was a speechwriter for many of these. I'm fucking that up. But she currently resides in Murphy, California, and she's running her own business. After such a long tenure at Apple and learning so much there, she has pivoted to creating a retreat space called the Land of Make-Believe. And she also runs a really cool creative brand visioning agency called Cause and Effect Creative.
Yeah, she has her fingers in a lot of cool stuff, and I think I know I resonate with her. I won't speak for all of you, I'll speak from the eye, but I resonate with her being a multifaceted, multi-hyphenated creative who's interested in so many different things, who also has a squiggly brain, who's neurodivergent, and wants to do a lot and is a super high achiever, and getting caught up in that high achieving moment and being really good at a lot of stuff and then getting absolutely just totally burnt out and exhausted. So if you've been burned before, if you've reached burnout before and maybe had to go through the healing process through that, it's hard to trust yourself to come back. And I think that this conversation will help you do that and come back into trust with yourself so that you don't maybe make those same steps that you made before, and so that you can really do your work here, which is to shine.
Yeah, I think you guys are really going to love this conversation. We also do talk about some generative strategies to use in creative work, and we also get into a little bit of the business of her past and what it was like to work where she worked.
It was really
at
interesting.
Apple.
Yeah, we talk about salaries in this episode, just as a heads up. So you're definitely going to want to listen to it because it will increase your energetic minimum hearing actual numbers from other people. Yeah. I think it will be really helpful to you if you feel like you're an under earner.
That's true. And she does not shy away from that, which I really respected.
Me too.
Because it's something to normalize, which is really nice. And it may sound like we meander, but we bring it back around.
We land the plane, trust us.
As true squiggly brain people.
Just go with it.
We cover a lot. Yeah. So we hope that you enjoy this episode and the rest of the series. It's going to be a fun one to venture on.
Yeah, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast so that you don't miss anything in this series. And if you want to go ahead and give us 5 stars, we appreciate that.
We love you for it.
We really like it. Thank you. It helps us get amazing guests like Anita on the podcast and helps more people discover us, which helps us make more content for you. So, do us a solid. We'd appreciate it.
We love you. Let us know what you think of the episode.
Let's get into it. Did Janelle do?
So I'm Anita. The last name is Stubenrauch. Exceptionally difficult to read and then try to pronounce. But it just is like the stew has been raw before it's been cooked. So I'm a creative. Right now, what I'm up to, I'm building an event and retreat space called the Land of Make and Believe on 14 acres out in Murphy's, California. It's about 3 hours east of San Francisco, halfway between Tahoe and Yosemite in the Sierra foothills.
Oh, cool.
I'm out here with a bunch of animals, goats, sheep, alpacas, pigs, dogs, a cat, trying to build something that, I am sort of beautifully out of my depth in. And to make that happen, to sort of fund this endeavor, I have a creative agency called Cause Effect Creative. And what I do is I help purpose-driven folks express who they are and what they're about in really powerful ways through mission, vision, purpose, expression, manifesto writing, that kind of stuff. And I came to doing that. I spent 13 years as a creative at Apple, starting out in a retail store, wearing a name tag and a blue t-shirt, helping people do creative things on the computer, and ended up getting pulled out of the store and dropped into corporate to help them do some creative things, which led to me getting hired into corporate as kind of a one-woman creative agency for the team that built and designed the Apple stores. Wow. So I did that for about 4.5 years, like art directing, architectural photography, making movies, designing presentations that would go in front of Steve and the board of directors, all that kind of stuff. And it's really super bizarre how I ended up as a writer, because all along while that was happening, even before I started working at Apple, in college, I was super awkward when it came to love and romance. So I did one of the things that I do best, which is to take a class. And I took a class called Flirting for Nerds.
Oh my gosh, I want to take this.
This was life-changing. Rebecca, the woman leading this class, and this was out of like a sex shop, like on the north side of Chicago, like a feminist sex shop. She taught me about conversation starters. And it kind of blew my mind, and I did something else that I do best, which is like take an idea to kind of a ridiculous extreme. And I started a blog as an excuse to talk to smart, sexy guys. And I called it Indoor Boys. And I actually wrote it on my contract at Apple as like my own intellectual property. Not that Apple would ever have
did not
any
wake up ready for the camera.
Trying to claim it as theirs, but I did.
Yeah.
You never know. And the woman who ran communications at Apple heard about it and invited me out to coffee.
We're also going to do an
coffee
intro
turned into a
you,
job
so
interview,
we can
and
talk
suddenly
about
I was hired as a writer
what
at
you
Apple.
want us to say, and make sure
And
that
I did
we
that
intro
for
you
Gosh, I'm bad with numbers. I want to
but,
say like 5, 6, 7
as
years maybe.
we will kind of edit and mix and match stuff, do you want to tell the listeners just a little bit about who you are and where you're at in your career path right now, and what brought you to
time, I think was like
where you
the
are?
highest paid woman in North America.
Wow.
So I'm Anita.
Mic drop.
I know, seriously. That just got my mind spinning. I was like, wow, that's right. People like that need a speech writer. Like they need someone to spin up words for them and make themselves as smart as they are, but also like as powerful and eloquent and direct, deliberate. And of course, they need a writer to do that. Like it makes sense that they might not be naturally skilled at that.
Well, and also helping them identify what audience they're with at any given moment, because somebody at that level, so many meetings, so many different audiences, and switching gears, just remembering what are the talking points for this given situation. How do you thread all of these different endeavors together in a way that people can understand a cause and effect relationship, and in a way that they care about and can do something?
To kind of take it back a little bit to flirting, I think we talk about this a lot, especially when we're talking about copywriting, that good copywriting, you're often flirting with your audience. And
that's interesting.
What a skill that is. And art it is, really, to know how to flirt, because so much of flirting is about connection and about finding those sticking points of how to relate and how to expand the conversation, maybe take it a step further and have a little bit of, maybe not shock and awe, but surprise and delight. That's something that's really important to us as we talk to our community and fellow creators about how to get into that space of having fun with writing and the creative process.
We call it charm and disarm.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think a really good flirt also makes you feel seen.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what a charming person is surprising, and also like they give you 100% of their focus and attention. Like they're truly listening when they're charming, you know?
I love that.
Yeah.
I want to know more about this class.
It's probably like 20 years since I took it. I mean, who knows? It probably have like evolved. Maybe they have like a multi-day course or something. But
oh my gosh, I want to take this class. From your speech writing and your blogging days, is that something you continued, or did you kind of have to let that go while you were taking full-time work at Apple?
Yeah, I mean, I kept the blog going kind of in the background at Apple for a while, and then some things made it hard to sustain, and a lot of these things have been solved with technology since then, but you know, literally just having a conversation then trying to transcribe it, right? These apps that do that for you didn't exist then, and so it's so tedious to try to do it yourself. So that was a huge barrier for me. The tech, even just like the website stuff, I was trying to use a WordPress
You
site.
truly never know.
And it just kept breaking constantly. And it ended up getting hacked, and and I just never brought it back to life after that. And then, you know, as you would imagine, working for a company like Apple takes, you know, a good portion of your life and attention and energy and then some. So, what's that?
Part of your soul.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that pejoratively too. It's, you know, it can be completely inspiring.
Right. When you believe when you literally write the credo for a company, like you do believe it, you have to believe in it.
Yeah. You can't write that from a cynical point of view. But it is fascinating, you know, to have lived so many different lives in relationship to a company, and like having been extremely burnt out and cynical to like falling in love again, to being able to write that, to like becoming super burned out and cynical again. And I mean, I think a lot of times when I talk about Apple, especially in short conversations, like folks want me to have like sort of one single point of view on the experience. And I just don't, you know, it's so much more complex than that. And it was beautiful and like maddening and you know,
to kind of take it back a little bit to flirting. I think we talk about this a lot. especially when we're talking about copywriting.
I'm still super grateful
that
for
good
all of it.
copywriting.
Yeah, sorry, I
you're
didn't mean to
often
interrupt
flirting with your audience.
Yeah.
And
it sounds like you've always kind of been
what
someone
a
who
skill that is.
had something they're working on the back burner, or maybe not even on the back burner, adjacent burner, while doing a more maybe like forward-facing job. Sounds like that's what you're doing right now.
The conversation, maybe
I'm just curious, like, how do you not burn yourself out while juggling that real job that's maybe what's paying you, or even like offering you some a creative respite or inspiration and doing your own thing? Because I think that we can tend to like go to the extreme of either being completely checked out of our day job and being miserable, which kind of sucks for everyone. Like, it mostly sucks for you, because if you hate what you do for 8 hours a day, then like, guess what? You hate a lot of your life, you know? So how do you like, now that you've done that for so long, it sounds like maybe your MO, what's your perspective on that? Like, how do you balance those two things?
I mean, it's a really good question.
I'm still stuck on it.
There are points at which
and your
I did find creative fulfillment in the day job, right? The work that I was doing. And I was lucky to be a creative who was gainfully employed, right? Of my friends who went to art school, like, I was it, you know? And it was one of those things that fed into, like, when I knew I wasn't happy,
or did you kind of have to let that go while you were taking
like,
on,
are you crazy?
You're
an artist who has a paycheck.
And a great paycheck from Apple.
And a pretty decent paycheck. Yeah. So there are moments when it was fulfilling and the moments when it wasn't. I mean, a really sort of silly example, you know, one of the teams that I worked on was quite toxic, like, in all transparency. Very challenging leader to work with, and I worked very closely with them. And my creative outlet, when I felt like I had no control over so much of my life, was what I wore. Right? And I challenged myself for whatever reason arbitrarily to not wear black for a year.
I mean, that's quite a challenge at Apple, where it's the uniform.
Well, for a lot of people, especially if they wanted to model themselves after Steve. But I didn't really see anybody wearing the black turtleneck.
Part of your soul,
the New Balance.
Can you imagine?
On the nose.
And I don't necessarily mean that pejoratively too. And it can be
gave me some sense of control and creative outlet, you know. And I did find it fulfilling, and it changed the way that I dressed, you know, from then on. But I feel like to balance these things, you have to have something that is bringing you joy somewhere. You know, if you don't, you know, I think that's kind of the difference between burnout and overwhelm, right? With burnout, there's just nothing left to give. Overwhelm, you kind of just don't know which way to start or to go. Either side, you have to have joy somewhere, because if you don't, you can't renew any of the stuff with burnout, right? There's no recharging of the batteries, no refueling, no reinvigorating. With overwhelm, right, sometimes joy can point us to the direction where we should start, right? Like, sometimes you get the goosebumps, and you're like, oh, I think
like
my
any
feet
good love
in this
affair.
particular direction towards this project.
Yeah,
right now.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
It can be a balance, though. I mean, I love the way you describe, like, folks with squiggly brains, because sometimes being, you know, the holder of a squiggly brain, it can be distracting, you know, to get attracted to the shiny things.
I would say that's the typical.
So, you know, I mean, and when you find joy in a lot of things, that can be challenging as well.
Oh yeah, because you're like, I like everything is interesting to me. Like, where do I even start? And I want to do it all at once. Like, I want to eat everything. My eyes are bigger than my stomach. And then you very quickly reach overwhelm, which can, you know, spill over into burnout, because you are just getting through things to go through them. Like, you're going through the motions of the creative process because you need to get something out, or you want to be able to jump to the next thing. Almost like you can't be in the moment in the creation of it. And then I think that's where burnout comes. And I'm so interested to see how people return to the office, because I think this last 2 years has really made us question, like, our why, obviously, and how we do the things that we do, the systems that have been set up for us, or that we've had to sort of fold ourselves into, especially squiggly brained people, maybe noticing, hey, I work really well when I'm not at my office, or it's actually really hard for me to focus when there's like my husband eating cereal. Like that's my big pet. That was like when I knew I had ADHD, extreme ADHD, when like I literally couldn't write an email because my husband was chewing cereal in the other room, and I was like, I cannot do this. But I think that we're at this moment, this inflection point where we can either choose to go back and sort of fall into the muscle memory of how things were, or we can pick a new path. And I'm curious for you, like, first off, what do you think is going to happen? And second, like, how can people stay fresh to that, like, the new path that they might want to choose instead of going back?
I mean, that's quite a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's going to be a tension
it's the
between folks who want to go back and want it to just immediately be the way that it was.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
They're kind
a little too on the nose.
To be the way that it was.
Oh my gosh, no way. But don't you think we have like rose-colored glasses on the way things were before? Like,
oh yeah,
everyone hated their jobs before this, you know?
But nostalgia is such a like sexy drug when things are unknown, and I think we're at this interesting inflection point of going back to work because there's all of these hybrid models that are being tested, and it's like, are those really going to work? Mm-hmm. And everyone has different hopes and expectations, and how are those all going to jive? It's going to be so interesting to see. What a great little experiment.
Yeah, I mean, and there are companies that are trying to sort of force a model of flexibility on people that isn't actually flexible, right? Like, be in the office like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Monday, whatever, 3 random days a week. Okay. When for somebody, it might actually be easier for them to be there a week on, a week off.
Oh, yeah, right? Totally.
Like, but they're just not interested in having that kind of conversation because it's seemingly too complex when it might not actually be. Like, the number of variables or variants, like, is not infinite. You have a finite number of beings. And there might just be certain kinds of things that bring people together in person are best suited for. And maybe we can take a look at that, you know. There are some things that I do miss about being around other humans. I mean, I'm out on 14 acres, right? I talk to my dogs. They're not the greatest in a brainstorm. They like all my ideas, you know. But
like, yes, more of that. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, they're just wagging their tails. They're like, yes.
Yeah, they're wigging.
That idea is genius.
Exactly. As long as they get fed, they're like, yeah, say more of that. But there are certain things, you know, I am a verbal processor. So having a conversation with people to think things through, like, I miss that. And for brainstorms specifically, like, I think those are really well suited to an environment where people are in person and, like, moving physically. Again, I'm also kinesthetic, so that helps me. And it helps focus the conversation because I think on digital spaces, especially when we're seated, right, brainstorms tend to devolve into conversations, which aren't the same thing.
We're missing the physical cues, the kinetic energy that is exchanged, and we talk also a lot about now I'm forgetting.
Extended mind theory.
Extended mind theory, but when you see other people working.
Oh yeah, body mirroring.
Yeah.
Yeah, mirror neurons, and gestural foreshadowing of like, we understand a lot just by moving, and sometimes we understand something physically before we understand it mentally, and being able to move and watch someone else gesture can help us come to a determination.
Yeah. Well, and some communicators are primarily nonverbal, right? And it's been interesting being a speechwriter for someone like that, because I remember sitting in a meeting and this person was communicating, and you're sitting there in the audience, you get what they're saying, you sort of get their vision through like body language and kind of charisma, like sort of shooting stars that come out of them. When you leave and you actually look at what was said, like if you transcribe the conversation, you're like, I don't think they actually said anything.
Wow, that's interesting.
And it's fascinating because, you know, they've gotten to where they are, which is a significant role, right? But you wouldn't even notice that when you're working with them.
But nostalgia is such a sexy
speaking
drug
of working
when
alone, how are
things are unknown, and I think
for
we're
yourself,
at this
what are your practices that
interesting
help
inflection
you,
point
or
going back
people
to
that
work because there's all of these hybrid models that are being tested, and it's like, are those really going to work? And everyone has different hopes and expectations, and how are those all going to jive?
Yeah.
It's going to be so interesting to see.
I mean, so, you know, when I was saying earlier that this is very alive for me right now, I'm trying to do so many different things at the same time. Right. trying to build this event and retreat space, trying to generate the money, the revenue that I need to reinvest in it, building podcasts that I'm going to launch this summer, developing curriculum for different courses to help teach people how to do some creative things that can help them. And sometimes I get overwhelmed, like, okay, of the 17 things that I could do right now, which is the one that I should be doing at this moment? I prioritize, verbally with support. I have an assistant, Meg, who is like a godsend, and she helps me think out loud. I have other tools that so I don't have a whiteboard in my space that I can use very well, but this week actually became quite clear that I need this tool in my physical space so I can be up and moving and like putting stickies and things, rearranging them. So I made kind of my poor man's version of it, where I took like a big sticky and put a bunch of little stickies on it to just and I timed myself. I have a timer, so I'll set it for 5 minutes, and I'll say, okay, only 5 minutes, how many different themes around the word gift can I come up with? And come up with this. And I'm like, cool, that was quite productive. And it gives me a little bit of a jolt of energy to do the next thing.
Oh, yeah.
But there's, some of it also so energy based. And right now I'm doing pretty well, but for a year prior to the pandemic and really like the first year of the pandemic,
physical cues,
was really
the kinetic
hard for
energy
me.
that is exchanged.
I got diagnosed
and we
in
talk
early
also a lot
2020
about
with stage 3 Lyme.
I'm forgetting. Extended mind
not
theory,
understanding like why am I so tired when I love what I do.
Like when you see other people
I
working,
love who I work with.
You're having
I love where and I have so much passion for the things that I want to do in my life, and I have this much energy to do them.
Yeah.
So I tried to get really creative around where would I put any energy, and it had to be in things that were furthering the big vision that threads across all of the different endeavors that I have, and gave kind of the most return on energy, and not just investment, not just, not even necessarily just capital, although that was, and is important. I don't know if I gave you strictly routines and things.
No, I think that's so useful. And actually, one of the things that you mentioned in your notes that I thought was interesting was talking about opportunity debt. And I'd be curious to hear a little bit more on your perspective on that as it relates to trying to discern what is the right thing to focus on and when.
Yeah. So the concept of opportunity debt.
Speaking of working alone, how
are
you,
was given for
yourself, what are your practices that
and
help
it was
you or
based on this
idea
of like,
your
are
teams?
we lifting women up
do you
or
kind
are we
of
holding
look
them
out
back
for signs of
in some
burnout and
capacity?
prevent that? Or
and as I was having a conversation with them, we were talking about our own experiences, professionally that we've had. And something that was clear was this idea that sometimes when we're trying to advocate for the next thing, whether that's renegotiating salary or contract or trying to get a promotion, something like that, oftentimes we get this either explicit or implicit, you should be grateful for what you have and where you are. And kind of this unspoken, like, how dare you ask for more? And I was like, that's happened to me, that had happened to her, and I had witnessed it happening. And I was like, what is behind that? And that's what led to this concept where, like, what's really happening is that person, for one reason or another, believes that they are responsible for where you are and that you are beholden to them for your success, and that they're holding those strings in some capacity. And the terms of that relationship are not explicit. So the strings, the terms keep changing, right? Like there's no way to get out of the opportunity debt when someone holds you in it. And I think it's not always conscious. Like I think sometimes it's kind of just the way that things have been done, this like kind of quid pro quo concept, like going way back into olden times. But it's insidious, and I think it happens a lot more to women, people of color, anyone who seems to have a lower position of perceived power in any given like power dynamic. Yeah, and for me, I mean, the way that this showed up, like in my life, one example, I was angling for a raise in my first corporate job at Apple. I've been there, I think, a year, maybe 2 years. And, you know, I thought I had done really good work. I had really good reviews, all of the things. And my boss came back and said, but you had surgery, right? I had sleep apnea surgery, medically necessary. I was like not breathing while I was sleeping. I was falling asleep while I was driving, and like automatic behavior. I would drive and I would have no idea how I got somewhere. Yeah, it was scary. So I had surgery to correct it. I was out of work, I think, for maybe a month. Came back, and his version of opportunity in that moment was like,
I think
Apple
that's
paid
so
for your
useful,
surgery.
and actually one of
And
the
it wasn't even Apple. It was like my insurance that I had to benefit through Apple, right? And at the time, like I was so junior,
on your perspective on
and
that as it relates
I didn't have
to
words
to
express like
what
why
is the right thing to focus
that was
on and when.
so wrong
Mm-hmm.
and not fair, and just like what am I supposed to do with that? How am I supposed to react to that?
Yeah, that's wild. I've actually, I feel like I've seen both sides of this, like almost both extremes of it. Like that, like is the story that you just told, a horrible, I'm not going to call this person horrible, but like an employer using something that should just be a right or like a given as like, well, you should just be grateful that you still get to be here. But I've also, and I think this can be really confusing for people who have experienced marginalization, because it keeps us second guessing ourselves, of almost the opposite of like asking for perhaps like more than we are entitled to in a way. Do you know what I mean? Like,
can you give me an example?
Like saying, you know, well, I want you to be an advertiser on my podcast. I have 5,000 listens, and that's going to be $5,000. Whereas the going rate for something like that is XYZ. And I think it can be really hard to find a middle ground, especially as someone who maybe doesn't work in a corporate space or have peers that they can bounce ideas off of or have conversations around what would be like not just appropriate, because appropriate isn't the right word, but an equal like consumption rate. Like what feels like an equal energetic exchange between the two of us. Does that make sense? I think it can be like really confusing and dysregulating, because it can feel like, well, is this am I not getting paid because of my identity, or am I getting taken advantage of, or am I actually, is what I'm asking for maybe like not the first place to start, and I can develop this relationship and then maybe ask for what I'm asking for. But I think so often we are on one end of the spectrum or on the other end of the spectrum, and both feel bad.
I mean, the optimal relationship is one in where you can have the conversation, right? Where you can be like, okay, cool. I see what you came in with as a quote. Here's what is the going rate for this. Here's what my business can actually sustain. Here's why. And money strictly doesn't need to be the only sort of exchange, right? And I love that you guys explore this. There are other ways to support each. And I mean, I'm literally sort of going through a version of this right now where, you know, I was looking to work with a team of copywriters just so that I'm not the only one writing all of the content, doing all of the things, right? Trying to do the smart thing you do as an entrepreneur, which is make yourself redundant in roles that you shouldn't be in. And the bid that came back, like, frankly, shocked me.
I've been there before. I'm like, wait, what?
And
as a copywriter, you kind of know too. Like, you're like, this is what I would ask for. So,
right?
Yeah.
And you know, I don't know whether I'd given off the impression that my business was in a place to sustain that kind of investment. What? And I love paying people well.
Yeah.
Right? That is a value of mine. I want people to feel appreciated and rewarded for the work that they do. And I can't afford that. Right? And it was so far beyond what I could even begin to afford that it was like, there is no bridge between us.
Right. You're like, I don't know how to negotiate down from here.
Yeah. I mean, if I was going to spend, good God, like $37,000 on email, I would be hiring George Tannenbaum, who is this like badass like copywriter. He might be $7,000 a day, but you get your money's worth from George.
Yeah, you need him for one day.
You get him for one day, like he can knock some stuff out. And it's interesting because like the follow up from that has been around, one of the copywriters being a junior copywriter, like advocating for, asking what she's worth and all the things. And I hear that and I appreciate that. I really do. And when I was looking at working with her specifically, it was because I could see some potential, and she's young enough in her career that I could help develop it. Right? Not that she's at this level that warrants a significant hourly rate currently, but I could see her getting there, and I was willing to be part of the getting there. For both of us.
Yeah, that's like when you work with someone more junior, that there's going to be a coaching up that happens, and like that's part of the energetic exchange of like, I'm going to spend more hands-on time with this person, more like an employee relationship in a way than I would absolutely trusting like a total expert to just take this completely off my hands.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I know folks, writers from Apple who don't make a third of what she was proposing to charge. And these are writers who have teams of writers, and who are like phenomenal in their craft. So, and it's tricky, right? Because I don't want to like come back and be like, you're not worth what you think you're worth. It's not that strictly,
right?
But it's a component of experience and skill, and the kind of working relationship. And so I'm in the moment right now figuring out like, okay, is there a bridge back to working together or not? I don't know. And it's I don't want to have a power dynamic between us where it feels like, she feels like she's had to come back and sort of try to get the business. Do you know what I mean? By like lowering her rates to what is acceptable. And I don't want to have to feel like, I don't want to feel, I don't want to feel like awkward.
Yeah, that relationship can like build resentment, right? If someone feels like I'm lowering my rates to like work with this person, or if they came in just like with absolutely, they added a zero to their numbers because they thought, which is always a compliment, right? When someone thinks that you're like insanely successful, so much so that you could afford a $37,000, a month copywriter. Like, how nice, how flattering, but also like, are they going to be embarrassed that like actually really like, yeah, I could do it for a lot less, and I could do it just as well. And it makes me really like, we talk to so many content creators on this platform, and we are content creators, and so are you, and work with creative people. And I think that can be really challenging, that middle ground for creative people of, okay, how do I like ask for value? Because what I do is invaluable. Like if I write you an amazing sales page, that could earn you millions and millions and millions of dollars beyond this sale, like, above and beyond. It could introduce you to people who follow you for years, who end up being your clients. My work is invaluable. I know that, which makes it really hard to put a price on it. And I also know that I need to like, keep a roof over my head and also have my needs met beyond the basic needs. I need to be able to thrive. And I think that is tied to burnout, of almost having to convince yourself and others of your value, and always trying to find that and use money or like a salary or an hourly rate as a way to express your value. If that's what you tie your value to, you're going to burn out instantly, because those two things really aren't correlated,
Yeah. I mean, that sums up so much of my entire experience at Apple. I mean, to be honest, so, I would actually be curious, without me telling you, which I will tell you, but what would you have expected my salary at Apple to be?
I would, anyone who works at Apple and Netflix, Facebook, I'm like, you probably earn starting salary between 100 and 150K. What do you think?
So,
what was your technical like title and level, or do they do levels at Apple? I forgot.
They kind of do, but they actually don't always do it in a way that makes any kind of sense.
Yeah.
I mean, you go through Credo, so I would say like you're probably like head writer situation, and I would say easily like median salary would be $150K.
Yeah, that's what
you second that?
I second that, but then
you're telling me no.
My hesitancy is because Apple's not like a new tech company, and that reflects new tech company salaries.
That's right. You're so smart.
Apple is a legacy company.
Old money. Yeah.
Similar to HBO, who now has this renewed, it still exists within the other tech giants, but actually operates from a very old money, or not old money, but old school hierarchical corporate perspective.
That's so true. Okay, I'm dying to know what was that.
So when I worked in the store, I can't remember my hourly rate, but it was decent for being hourly, right? When I got hired out of the store into corporate, it was fascinating because they were looking for somebody who was kind of this like one-woman creative agency, right? Which doesn't exist in a single person because smart people specialize, right?
Right. Or you become an influencer, which if you're an influencer, you are a one-person creative agency.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. So, and I had read the book, Women Don't Ask, about the salary gap in negotiation, before this conversation happened. And so I had done my research. I was like, what is the going rate for someone who can make movies, design presentations that go in front of the Steve Jobs and the board, right? All these different things. And I was like, okay, so in an agency, that person, junior, starting out, maybe 115, right?
Yeah.
So I said that.
The agencies are.
What's that?
I said depends what kind of agency. Agencies can be very stingy.
Yeah,
it's also true. Yeah. And when I shared that with the recruiter, they laughed.
Wow.
No.
And they said, well, you've got family in California. Don't you want to be near your family? And I was like, what does that have to do
with anything?
With anything?
Yeah.
Hey, you don't know the relationship with me and my family. Yeah, I got along with them. Right? I would like to be around them, but you have no idea.
Yeah.
And so, I ended up starting at, I think, 85.
With or without RSUs?
No RSUs.
Oh. Were you full-time or contract? I'm getting
full-time.
Ready. Interesting.
Full-time. And at the time, stock was not granted to anyone in retail corporate below a director level.
Okay. I guess they have to be competitive now, and that's the only reason they do it now.
Yeah. So, it took me 13 years.
Wow.
To get to 130.
No.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Whoa.
And so, and when I left, I had some stock, but a lot of it had invested, and I got a stock bonus for writing the Credo, but it would take 4 years, before I would actually have gotten it. And at the time, by then I was so burned out, there was no way I could stay any longer and do it.
What was your technical,
and I do actually, I owe the jump
level?
that I did make
to
a manager that I had who saw what had happened. Yeah. And it was partly because I was coming from retail, right? They're like, from retail to this salary, that's a jump, but that's not what the market says about this role, independent of being in a store. So for me, leaving and starting to even try to get a sense for what my value is, right? Because I kept hitting the ceiling.
I second that, but then
if I can write the Credo,
my hesitancy is because Apple's not a new
and I still can't
tech company,
get a promotion,
and that reflects new tech company salaries.
There is nothing.
Apple
else
is
I can do.
A legacy company.
No, and
it's
so
to
crazy
HBO,
because now I feel like there's a lot of comment around tech jobs being salaries being totally. They actually are closer to reflecting what salaries should be.
Corporate perspective.
Actually reflecting as of inflation from the 80s. So when you look at that trajectory, you're like, oh, actually these companies are more in line with where the quality of life has gone with regards to inflation. But, obviously there are other economic factors.
Yeah, but the opportunity of taking on a role at Facebook or Netflix is that you burn out in a year or 2 years. You don't have a 15-year, role at a company like that. you just know that like your time is limited because you can only push that hard for so long, and that's why they give you that money.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's also the culture, I think, from when those companies started that nobody stays in a job more than like 2 3 years, right? You sort of get looked at like, why are you still there?
Yeah, yes,
right?
absolutely. Like, what's wrong with you? Or you're lazy, or you're kind of like a passive person.
Well,
You're
it
just
depends
like,
what kind
you've
of
been here
agency.
for 5 years.
Agencies are stin.
You must not
I
be very
said depends what
aspirational.
kind of agency. Agencies can be
all
very
that, which
stingy
to me was not
in there.
That was not it at all, you know. And I was naive enough to think like, I'll show up, I'll do a really good job.
Wow.
Someone will recognize that, and I will get rewarded.
Right.
You know.
Are you a
And I think that I am. I took the one little test.
That's literally exactly what projectors do. We like wait to be seen. It's we have to do. We have to wait to be recognized in order for people to like, for us to really shine. Like, and that usually means we just do our work heads down until someone sees us. But yeah, it can backfire on you.
With or without RSUs.
Yeah, no, that sounds pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah,
I was always way more about just doing the thing versus talking about doing the thing or self-promoting about doing the thing. I could care less. It got to a point where like, there was enough. I was the only female.
I guess they have to be competitive
lead.
now.
Wow.
That's the only reason they do it.
In retail communications. And it got to a point where like, different folks, we'll say different men on the team, right, would repeat ideas that I had shared, right, as their own, right, later on in other meetings where I wasn't present. But my colleague knew where the idea originated. And so she would speak up and she would be like, yeah, Travis, that's great. I really loved when Anita shared that idea in a meeting 2 meetings ago, right? Like, you have to do silly things like that, or you get to where your ideas start to have their own stamp as well, so that they travel out in advance of you, and people know where they come from. And I hate thinking that way, right? Because the idea is that a good idea should survive. It should help people. It should do something. It bring people together. You make something that's like worth making. So the idea that like championing myself, I just am not interested.
Yeah, it's like it's a different form of, well, I think it like stifles creativity to be constantly almost thinking like, how is this going to get me? How am I going to use this to advance myself? Like, I think like all of us who are creative types
now
or
I feel like there's a lot
whatever,
of comment around
we're really channels
tech jobs
of,
being,
we're taking information from some other place, right? And it's our responsibility to metabolize that and share it with the world in the best way that we possibly can. And those ideas have chosen us for a reason. And
reflecting
it's our, like we have to do it. We have to share it, or else they will go to somebody else. They will. Like, their message needs to be spread. And so the idea that you'd have to like also sort of like project yourself forward instead of and like prioritize yourself as opposed to like that kernel of the idea and the work that it will do in the world is so backwards from a creative perspective. And I think again, like taking this back to burnout, that's what when we're not tapped into our channel, like when we're so distracted by trying to like progress ourselves in a way because it's a necessity because we live in a work environment that's toxic and doesn't allow for anything else, that will burn us out so fast because we're not connected to our energy source, which is like that channel of idea or inspiration.
Yeah.
And the answer that you're looking for, from your peers, from your like leadership, from whoever, you're not going to get it. Right? It just that's not where that comes from. And so it's a perpetual like exhaustion of trying to prove oneself and prove one's worth.
Right.
While intrinsically knowing, like, gosh darn it, like I do good work. I know I do good work.
That sounds right.
And sort of beating yourself up against this like arbitrary construct that is like their, sort of, what do you call it, compensation package that they could draw from, or that they can't give anyone like glowing reviews across all of the different criteria because they're just not allowed to. Like, so silly.
Yeah.
And for me, one of the greatest gifts I've experienced since leaving was having conversations with clients and prospects who told me what they thought my work was worth in a way that shocked me. I mean, I had one conversation with a client, and I hadn't even written a proposal at this point in time, right? And I just guided her through like a series of questions. And at the end of that conversation, she's like, if you told me right now it costs $100,000 to work with you, I would gladly pay it.
Wow.
And I was like, what?
Yeah.
You're like writing that on a notepad. You're like, right, $100,000.
Yeah.
I mean, and I was nervous about telling people that, you know, projects would start at $6,000.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. Go ahead.
It just, yeah, how we place value on things related to money is so complex. And I don't want to interrupt this conversation, but I want to be mindful of our time. We have you till 12. We can go 10 minutes over if that's okay for everybody.
Yeah, it's like
as a max, but we will get
I think it like stifles
also locked out.
Yeah, they will have a 10-minute mark, so we'll lose our sound system. So we'll start to wrap and wind it down now.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to touch on as we kind of round out burnout is what you had talked about with play and how we can use play as creatives to reignite. You know, even if you're in a job where you're like, I'm feeling a little burnt out, but like I'm not ready to leave or whatever it might be, whether it's just that it's you and you're aligned, you're working mostly at home alone. What are the different ways that you like to use play with your teams or just yourself?
Yeah, I think for my mind, my squiggly brain, to get engaged in play is always about trying to find a way in, an unexpected way into a problem. And even sometimes visualizing, like, if the problem itself is like some kind of object in 3D space, like, what is the way to approach it from above, from below, from the side? What's the way to, like, sort of split an atom and get to the core of it, right? And just finding, I mean, one example of this would be like a concept, like, take this and put it there. So if baseball exists here, what might baseball look like in a totally different kind of environment, right? On an ice skating rink, what does it do?
Nope.
If baseball is a thing you're trying to like promote or learn from or whatever, putting it into a entirely different context will tell you more things about baseball than if you're just looking at it straight on, right? And doing that, I mean, it's a pretty bizarre example because I don't do anything with baseball or ice skating, but
like basketball.
Yeah. But it starts to get your mind interested, at least my mind interested in kind of the puzzle aspect of something. And especially when you've got an objective that you're trying to meet. And if you've got more than one objective, you can start to find interesting ways to connect the dots across things. And like, how can you pinball and like ping different things at the same time?
Yeah, we talk a lot about finding like unique intersections of disparate topics, especially for squiggly-brained folks who are interested in so many different things, and how to really embrace that as like almost a superpower. If you can really and acknowledge it.
Sometimes if you can even just conceptualize drawing a straight line across these different things, right? So say you love like figure skating, say you love baseball, say you love, I don't know, shuffleboard, right? Draw lines across them, and where do they intersect? What's the same and what's different, right? And then it starts to tell you things. I mean, if it's something personal to you, and these are things that you really like, you can actually start to examine what are the values underlying these things. Like, what's consistent across all of them? And then what's consistent in my life? And then it becomes a really fascinating exercise to understand, like, what drives you? And what might drive the people that you want to connect with, because those values that you live in your life are the ones that other people are attracted to.
So complex,
and that can be just like a creative way to get at even understanding what they are.
Mindful of our time.
Right. I think so many people are kind of good at the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, but their own brain. You know, like, how do I go from this thing that I love to this totally separate thing that I think is really interesting, and sort of hop, skip, and jump, and actually like. In this space of being able to create our own content, like what we're doing right now didn't exist 5 years ago, making a podcast, right? Let alone in a studio, like with professional mics that we could do on our own. Like that has been, over the last 10, 15 years, it's phenomenal what we've been able to create. And so much of our thought process and our understanding, metabolization of ideas comes through the creative experience of making something, right? Of writing something. Like you said, you're a verbal processor. I think a lot of people are really good at making content and connecting a bunch of ideas, but don't always get down and sort of like go a little bit deeper for themselves of like, yeah, but what does that mean? You know, like I know I'm interested in all these things, but what is it? Like, what's the subtext, I guess, of that for me? What is the philosophy? What is the meaning making system of my life that I see the world through? And to your point, or what, you know, just repeating what you said, like, what's the through line? Like, what do all these things have in common?
That and the digging a little bit deeper, you know, in the content world, there's so many templates and so many formulas.
Yeah.
If you just scratch the surface a little bit more, uncover why that formula works. Mm-hmm. It has a lot to do with values that are at stake and empathy. Mm. And if you can understand what it's doing, you don't have to follow the formula. You can do something that is unique and that is true, and you can listen to that channel that's coming through you, and you can think about who it is you're trying to flirt with and connect with, and you can reach them in a meaningful way, as opposed to just being like, I'm following this particular sort of pseudo-confessional style of email writing. Right?
I'm thinking of the movie, I'm like,
people recognize, and it starts to feel like artifice, even if when it originated wasn't. Mm-hmm. You know?
Yeah.
But you just scratch a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
beautifully put.
Yeah, seriously. Like that's all we're trying to do here at Holisticism is just go a little bit deeper. But Anita, this has been so wonderful. Like I loved where our conversation, true squiggly brain form. We went everywhere.
But you brought it full circle.
Yeah, but hey, we connected. We did it.
Folks who are interested in some of these
so
things
I mean,
and
how can people find you and work with you and learn more about what you do?
Superpower.
I am at Anita Visions on the socials. I'm not the most consistent poster, but I'm working on that. Yeah, my website is causeeffectcreative.com. You can find me there too. And I'm always happy to connect with people on LinkedIn if they, want to. Yeah. And then hopefully, no, I'm not going to say hopefully. I'm saying, okay, this summer.
Yeah.
Comes my Hyperactive Imagination podcast. So I will let you know when that's live, but I'm very excited about it. It's about how to get folks from, a place of like playful possibility to like practical progress.
Cool.
Yeah.
We need that.
Yeah. We all need
implementation.
Yes.
Me too.
We all need all of that help.
Yeah. Wonderful. Anita, it was so great to talk to you. Thanks for spending this time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it was so fun.
So fun. I'm just going to hit stop recording.
This totally separate thing that I think is really interesting and sort of hop, skip, and jump. And actually, like, in this space of being able to create our own content, like, what we're doing right now didn't exist 5 years ago. Making a podcast, right? Let alone in a studio, like, with professional mics that we could do on our own. Like that, it's been, over the last 10, 15 years, it's phenomenal what we've been able to create. And so much of our thought process and our understanding, metabolization of ideas comes through the creative experience of making something, right? Of writing something. Like you said, you're a verbal processor. I think a lot of people are really good at making content and connecting a bunch of ideas, but don't always get down and sort of like go a little bit deeper for themselves of like, yeah, but what does that mean? Like I know I'm interested in all these things, but what is it? Like, what's the subtext, I guess, of that for me? What is the philosophy? What is the meaning-making system of my life that I see the world through? And to your point, or what, just repeating what you said, like, what's the through line? Like, what do all these things have in common? That and the digging a little bit deeper, in the content world, there's so many templates and so many formulas. Yeah. If you just scratch the surface a little bit more, uncover why that formula works. Mm-hmm. It has a lot to do with values that are at stake and empathy. And if you can understand what it's doing, you don't have to follow the formula.
You can do something that is unique and that is true, and you can listen to that channel that's coming through you, and you can think about who it is you're trying to flirt with and connect with.
Hey.
You can reach them in a meaningful way, as opposed to just being like, I'm following this particular sort of pseudo-confessional style of email writing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That people recognize, and it starts to feel like artifice, even if when it originated wasn't. You know?
Yeah.
But you just scratch a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Beautifully put.
Yeah. Like that's all we're trying to do here at Holisticism is just go a little bit deeper. But Anita, this has been so wonderful. Like, I loved where our conversation, in true squiggly brain form. We went everywhere.
But you brought it full circle.
But hey, we connected. We did it.
It's all about flirting.
Yeah, we landed that plane. Yeah, so, I mean, how can people find you and work with you and learn more about what you do?
I am at Anita Visions on the socials. I'm not the most consistent poster, but I'm working on that. Yeah, my website is and I'm always happy to connect with people on LinkedIn if they, want to. Yeah. And then hopefully, no, I'm not going to say hopefully, I'm saying, okay, this summer.
Yes.
Comes my Hyperactive Imagination podcast. So,
amazing.
Cannot wait for that.
I'll let you know when that's live. But
please do.
I'm very excited about it. It's about how to get folks from, a place of like playful possibility to like practical progress.
Cool.
Yes.
We need that.
Yeah. We all need
implementation.
Yes. All the squiggly brain folk. We all need all of that help.
Wonderful. Anita, it was so great to talk to you. Thanks for spending the time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it was so fun.
So fun. I'm just going to hit stop recording.
So, I think this is maybe going to go out next week or in 2 weeks.
Oh, what is that? Oh, okay. Yes, this is going to go out in, I think, about 2 weeks. I'll give you a heads up. Yeah. Yeah. We work quickly over here.
But we'll send you all the deets and let you know when it goes live so you can share.
Yeah.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And if there's anything specific, like any assets or whatever you want me to share on my channels back.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we can send you some stuff too, so it's easy to share. This was so lovely. I'm so happy that Vanessa reached out. You're such a perfect fit. Like, this was such an engaging, interesting discussion. Yeah. We got so much from this. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then as I'm developing the content and some of the conversations for my podcast as well, I might reach back out to see if you guys want to hop over here.
Hell yeah, I love that. You can hear our weird sides on our other podcast, Good For You, if you want to really see under the hood of what's going on in these brains.
I can send that over. That's where we let it all loose. We're a little bit more composed here.
Yeah, we're a little more, like this. But the other one's more wild.
Yeah.
Sweet. I will check that out.
Cool. It's so nice to meet you, Anita. Have a good rest of your Friday.
Likewise. You too. Have a wonderful weekend.
Bye.
Bye. That was fun.
That was fun.
So you can follow Anita on Instagram at Anita Visions and go check out her work. And you can follow Holisticism at Holisticism on Instagram. And we really want to know what you thought of this episode. And I can't wait to talk to you about the creative archetypes. That's coming in a couple weeks.
Oh, that's so fun.
There's some good stuff happening in this series. So make sure you're subscribed.
We also wanted to throw a little bonus your way. We have a really amazing database for creators that you may have guessed is on Notion, because we love using Notion here. And we're going to throw it in the show notes for you to check out. It's an awesome place to plan a lot of your content for the next few months.
It's called the Content Creation Station, and it is like
powerhouse.
Literally everything you could want and more as a content creator, because I made it and been a content creator for a really long time. It's got content, how to come up with content ideas, how to create an editorial calendar and an editorial calendar template. It's got some tarot spreads you can do, an astrology calendar you can follow, planetary hours that you can sort of use to figure out when to write best or when to create best, and an editing station with an editing checklist. So lots of good stuff that you definitely don't want to sleep on, and we'll include the link to that in the show notes.
Great.
Cool.
Well said.
All right.
And we'll see you next week.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.